Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about how the Greek philosophers and Jesus Christ were saying similar things, but they were saying it in different ways in regards to how they were affected by their culture. And first I'll start with the Greeks, and then I'll talk about Plato and Socrates, and then we'll talk about how those ideas match up with what Jesus was saying. So first I'd like to talk about the original Greeks that talk about a unified reality. And they were looking for a natural reality. And I believe strongly that they were talking about experiences that they were having. So the first person I want to talk about is a Greek philosopher named Thales. And what he proposed was that the basis of reality, the basis of everything in our world, was made of water. And so he said that out of all the elements, water originated everything. And so when you think about that, when you have deep experiences in a spiritual reality, things can shimmer and they can move like water, and things can kind of flow. And it's more of like an energy movement, at least from my experience. And then there is a verse in the Bible that says that that God sounds, His voice sounds like many waters, like a rushing waters. And you do hear those types of sounds in different spiritual states. The second person, the second Greek that talks about a unified type of field, and he talks about how fire originates, how everything originates from fire. And his name is Heraclitus. And so he basically said these Greeks were looking for an element that was the cause of all of reality. And their reality was a little bit, we have this mechanized view of the world. That's kind of the culture and the dogma that we live in. And they lived in a more amorphous type of reality where they're searching for what was causing things. And so the Greeks talked about how things were more natural that would cause things. And so Heraclitus said that he thought that he came after Thales, and he said, no, it's not water. The basis of reality is fire, and the element of fire is from which everything originates. And again, the people who experience these things, you can experience the world as it's this like shimmering, it's a shimmering power, shimmering field of light when you go into these higher states of consciousness. And so I don't know if those original philosophers, we don't know a lot about them. I don't know if they meditated or if they got very quiet. I'm assuming since they were searching for wisdom that they did. And in those states, you can experience them differently. A different person could experience a similar type of experience, but they could experience it as water. Another could experience it like fire. And I've mentioned this in other videos, but when I was with Cielo, who was an enlightened monk, the energy would be so powerful that I remember the walls would kind of fade and the room around you would fade away. It almost becomes spatial, but the energy was moving to such a degree that it looked almost like the tongues of fire coming up and moving down, and you would feel it pulsating in you. And so it wasn't a physical fire where you'd burn yourself, but you could feel this power and this love radiating, and it looked like fire to a certain extent. And then the next Greek who came along, he basically was, I think he was just shortly after Thales, and his name was Aniximander, and he had a really, really interesting view of what the basis of reality is. And he called it the aperon, or aperon, and that reality was a boundless state. It was almost like what you would think of as a boundless consciousness from which everything arose. And then things would go through a cycle and then they'd slowly fade back into the apeiron. And I think in our modern mystical understanding of the world, that makes a lot more sense to us, because if everything is conscious and everything is consciousness, it makes sense that if you're in a dream, things just kind of trickle up from this area that we can't totally see into. We can only feel into. And so things move up from this consciousness, and then they become very exposed and they become part of the physical world. And over time, they break down and they go back into that consciousness. And so that view is much more aligned with the Buddhist view of things arising from this Buddha mind and then fading back into the Buddha mind. But the interesting thing is, all of these early Greek philosophers said that the world was made up from one substance. And in these deep meditative states, we experience them in different ways, but they are true to a certain extent. There's water feeling, there's experience of fire, and then there's that deep sense of consciousness and that conscious love that we experience at deep, deep states of meditation. So next I would like to talk about Plato. Plato was a disciple of Socrates, and so we can't differentiate between Socrates and Plato very easily, but we have the writings of Plato, and Socrates didn't write things down. So Plato talked about this allegory of the cave, and he talked about how this was a symbol of the life that we live here. And so I'm going to go into that and talk about it from a mystical experience, and then we'll compare it to what Jesus said later on. So in Plato's story of the cave, or his allegory of the cave, he talks about, he creates a scene where people are chained down inside of a cave, and there's a light shining onto us, and there's people making like puppet figures behind a screen. And so the easiest way to think about this is if we were chained down in a movie theater and our heads were locked, so we had to look straight ahead, and all we could see was the movie theater, and everything was dark around us, so we couldn't see the people around us, but we were so engaged in the movie and we were interacting with the movie that we thought that the movie was real. And then in this allegory of the cave, basically someone is, they look over at the exit of the theater, and then they see a light, but the light is kind of blinding and they can't really see the screen as well, so they don't want to keep looking at it, so they kind of don't. And then someone drags them out. So if someone drags them out of the movie theater into the open light and into this open view, and basically that person is just completely blinded. They can't see very well, but they're infused with this like almost heavenly place of like light and trees, and everything is beautiful, and they can see grasses. And before they were in this dark movie theater, and everything was kind of like hazy, and like there was a lot of hues of like gray and black, and so now in the light, once his eyes adjusted, it was really powerful, and it'd be like moving from our realm, which a lot of saints consider like a dark realm, and then moving into this realm of light and power. And so the way most philosophers view that is the idea of going from ignorance to wisdom, or gaining philosophical insight. But you can see that from a spiritual perspective, it makes total sense that you go from a world of believing the things around you to seeing the area from which all things arise. In the context of thinking about Aniximander and how things arise from the apeiron, that makes more sense. There's this light that you merge with, this consciousness you merge with, and then you can start to see the original forms of things before they arise, and you get to feel these great energies moving. And so it's a very, very powerful scene. And in the scene of the allegory of the cave, the person eventually goes back into the cave, and he tries to tell people about, hey, let's remove these chains and let's get out of here. Let's go see the real world. And people laugh at it. They mock the person and laugh at the person, because when he comes in from the light of the outside world and into the cave, he can't see very well, and people are like, you went there and now you're blind and dumb and you're an idiot. And so it's another allegory of coming back and telling people about these spiritual experiences you have, and they kind of like think you're a silly idiot. Which the words do seem like that when you come back and you're trying to describe these experiences that aren't describable, and you merging with higher consciousnesses and feeling bliss and peace. It's hard for people to understand that, but I think that the original Greek philosophers, I think they had some insight into this, and so they were trying to relate this to people. And so then if we move this towards what Jesus said, he said that the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven is within you. And in the book of Revelations, when they talk about going to the throne of the divine, the throne of God, they go up through this little window, and through that little window or that little door, then once you get through, this whole world expands and opens up. And so it's similar to the door in the cave, which if you look into, you're kind of blinded and you want to get away from. But once you allow yourself to, die in a sense, or let go of yourself, you enter this expansive chamber. And so in the book of Revelations, when they talk about it, you go through this door and then everything opens up. And in Plato, you go through this door, leave the cave, and everything opens up and you enter this world of light. And in that same sense, Heraclitus, when he was talking about the world originating from fire, there's other verses in the Bible that also talk about how when the second coming comes, it comes with fire. It comes with destruction and fire. And that destruction and fire is, to me, the world fading into a spatial quality and the energy coming up. And you feel the world fading away from you. And so there is a destruction in a sense. It's just not a physical sense. And you feel the fire coming up. So that original reality, it's described in different ways because it's so difficult to describe. But I think they were trying to talk about the same experience. And so I'll leave with one last verse in the Bible. And it talks about how Jesus talked about how there's a narrow path and there's a wide path. And he said most people will go take the wide path, and that leads to destruction. And then in the narrow path, it leads to heaven, or it leads to those holy realms. And in the Bible, it says that there will be the people who take the wide path basically are led to like hellfire and doom. They don't specifically say that, but that's how the modern Christian interprets it. And then they say there's this small path that leads to heaven. And from a mystical standpoint, what that means is most people who are religious are going down this wide path because they haven't awakened to the heavenly world that exists right here. And it's not a place of doom. It's just that you're not free from the dramas of life. And so you're immersed in it and you think that they're real. And that causes a type of suffering and pain, and you can't get out of it. And so you're in a type of hell realm, even though it's good and bad and goes back and forth. When you can enter these heavenly realms and stay there, then you become that. And so there's very few people who do it, but in this age, more and more people are doing it. So in the canonical books of the Bible, they're a little bit more PC, and basically Jesus says like follow the spiritual path, and it's a narrow path, and if you do that and you seek, you'll find. In the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the Gnostic Gospels, which I believe it probably is one of the books of hidden teachings of Jesus. He separated his teachings into the masses. He taught what you see mostly in the Bible, and then to his disciples, he says in the book of Luke that he'll tell them the secret teachings, but he won't tell the masses because they won't understand it. But in the Gospel of Thomas, where he reveals some of those secret teachings, he basically says, take that narrow path, and then he's like, you will be astonished, and it says that you will rule over the all. And the all is capitalized, and the all is all of reality, all of God in reality. And so I wouldn't necessarily say in my experience that you rule them in the sense that how we think about it on earth, like a king ruling other things, but you are merged with all those things. And so in a sense, you do feel like you're within and around and above all those things because you're merged with it. And you feel this great sense of power and this great sense of love towards all things. And so I think that those are some examples of how the early Greeks and some of the most famous philosophers like Plato and Socrates interpreted the world similarly to the mystical teachings of Jesus. And I think they point to the reality which is just underneath the surface for all of us that we can experience. And so I think it's important for us, if we want to live a pure life, and we want to live with more love and less challenges, and enjoy life more in a more expanded way, that this is the reality that everyone's pointing to. It's the reality that most people are not able to find because they're not willing to search and search and search and search. But if we can quiet our minds, we can go there. And it's right here. It's right now. So that's the summary of the early Greeks, Plato, Socrates, and Jesus. And thanks for listening. This is Monastery Dropouts. Have a good night.